prenup is essentially a contract. It is a contract that the parties enter into before they get married, and it basically sets out what would happen in the event of a divorce or death, what would happen to the property. Why do people usually get prenups? Well, for a variety of reasons, but essentially we can boil that down into they want peace of mind. They want to know what's going to happen if, for whatever reason, the marriage doesn't work out. There could be several benefits to having a prenup. So essentially, the prenup is going to lay out what happens to all the property that is accumulated during the marriage in the event that there's a divorce or even a death. And it would take what would usually be community property, and it's going to make it the separate property of the spouses. So under normal circumstances, during a marriage, any retirement that you accumulate, any houses or other property that's bought, if it's bought during the marriage, under Texas law, it's going to be community property. The prenup would change what would otherwise be community property into separate property. So the spouses could enter into agreement that says my retirement is mine and your retirement is yours, and neither one of us will have a claim to the other's retirement in the event of a divorce. Why do people want prenups? Well, they want that peace of mind. And I think there's a general conception that, prenups are for the rich, but that's not necessarily the case. Even we've done prenups for people who are just starting out in life. They don't have two pennies to rub together, but they want a prenup because they want to know if the marriage doesn't work out, how those assets that they are able to accumulate would be divided without a long drawn out court battle, right? So I think there may be in a lot of circles, prenups are looked upon as, something negative because, well, we're already planning for a divorce even before the marriage has started, but that's not necessarily the case. A lot of young professionals want prenups because they're working hard to make that money, and they want the assurance that if the marriage doesn't work out, they're not having to divide that. And so I think that it can be a positive thing. It's not, you're not in an adversarial situation when you're negotiating what all the property division is going to look like. Y'all are still on the same team. So in that respect, it would be much better to go ahead and decide how property is going to be handled rather than waiting until there is a divorce started and now y'all are not on the same page and everything's a fight. It makes the divorce much, much simpler from a property division standpoint because the prenup has all that work's already been done. And if the prenup was done correctly, then you're locked in. So there is no fight over the property during the divorce, and that for a lot of people is very beneficial. Steps for creating a prenup. They can be as individualized as the couple that's considering entering into the prenup. And it all starts with being very honest with yourself and your future spouse about, what you're really looking to accomplish in a prenup. Prenups are contracts essentially, and they are as individualized as the couple. It's not a winner take all scenario. There could be lots of contingencies and factors that are taken into account, right? So both parties are working at the start of the marriage, and then several years down the road, kids come into play, and now we might need to change some of the aspects of the prenup because now one party may not be working. So having a lawyer that can help you kind of think through what you might want and what those down the road aspects that may need to be considered when you're negotiating and things are first starting out could be very important. But starting with that list of things that you are, what your biggest concerns are, and what your spouse's, your future spouse's biggest concerns are, could be important. How do you challenge a prenup? That does happen during the divorce context. One spouse may not decide that they still like the agreement they made years ago, and so they may challenge the validity of the prenup. Probably the best way to talk about that would be to look at it in the reverse. What makes it subject to attack? The biggest factor that plays into that is whether there's been a fair disclosure of what the assets are, right? So that is a very, very important part of getting your prenup in place. You have to disclose what your assets are and your liabilities. And I think the reason behind that is that your spouse or future spouse has to know what it is that they're giving up. And so without that disclosure, it could be subject to a collateral attack. Something else that makes the enforceability of the agreement kind of more on solid ground would be if both parties have an attorney. If you're the one wanting the prenup and your future spouse is like, that's fine, I will just sign it, they can sign a waiver, right, to that disclosure and to having an attorney. But if you really want it ironclad, those things need to be done. And you want your future spouse to have the benefit of counsel too, to let them understand the seriousness and the future risk potentially to them of the agreements that they're entering into. If you have questions about a prenup and what that process would look like, we're happy to talk to you about that. Please call us and we will get you in to get you some more information.